Hello there, and you're very welcome to today's event, Ireland, the EU and the Circular Economy, which is being brought to you by the European Commission representation here in Ireland and European Movement Ireland. My name is Noelle O'Connell and I'm the CEO of EM Ireland, and I'm delighted to be chairing today's excellent lineup of speakers for this really timely topic this morning when we look at the issues on Ireland, the EU and the circular economy. So the key aim of a circular economy is keeping resources in the market for as long as possible, placing a high value on both the products and the materials they contain, contrasting with the traditional economic model based on consuming resources or throwing them away. So in practice, a circular economy promotes sustainability through reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials, thereby significantly reducing residual waste. This morning's event is really timely because the European Commission has adopted the new Circular Economy Action Plan as a main block of the European Green Deal. And indeed, tomorrow, the Commission is set to adopt the Climate Pact communication, which will further support the Green Deal as the key tool for public engagement and social mobilisation. But our distinguished panel today are the real experts on this. And I'm going to introduce each of our three speakers in turn, who will provide us with their introductory comments and remarks for about 7 minutes each. And then following this, we'll open the debate for questions for those of you turning in today and for those of you who have already submitted your questions. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with your comments or your questions by emailing events@europeanmovement.ie and equally online on Twitter. So we encourage all participants to join the discussions using the hashtags Circular Economy, EU Green Deal. And if you want to make sure that we get to those questions on Twitter, please use the handles @EUR Ireland and @EM Ireland. My colleagues will be monitoring the Q&A and the Twitter machine and making sure that I get to those questions for you. So we'll then finish up with some closing remarks from our panel, and we'll see you all off well on your way before 11:45 a.m. Irish time. So a little bit like the current state of Brexit negotiations, we have our three speakers in Brussels, Dublin and London. So fantastic to welcome you all. And I'm delighted to invite our first speaker to present with us this morning, William Neal. William, I think, is joining us from Brussels. He's been an advisor on the circular economy and green growth at the European Commission's Environment Directorate General since 2018. William, you have the virtual floor.
Well, thanks very much, Noelle, and good morning to everybody from Brussels. I'll start off by saying a little bit about why we've adopted circular economy approach at the European level, and then say a little bit about the Circular Economy Action Plan. But to start off with, if you show the first slide, please. I mean, we have decades of environmental policy at European level, and it's been very legislation based. And we wanted really to move away from the sort of punishing the polluters approach, sort of a legal approach where we take member states to court for not meeting legal requirements, to actually avoiding pollution. And you can see the sort of underlying sort of macro global level reason for this in this slide. The global acceleration in resource use means that there is a huge amount of pressure being put on. The resources are becoming much more expensive. There are supply shocks and so on. And also resource use is actually driving about 90%, or I should say resource extraction and processing only is causing about 90% of biodiversity loss, if you include food production in that, and about 50% of climate related emissions. So environmentally, it's an important issue, but also economically. Now, if we look at the next slide, you can see how that sort of resource use has impacted Europe. So next slide, please. The next slide shows the flow of those resources that we saw in the first slide into Europe. They're coming in on the left-hand side there and going out on the right-hand side as either emissions or waste. And you can see actually that a lot of the resources that we get domestically in Europe are either sort of heavy, cheap, non-metallic minerals, which we use for building and so on, which is that sort of grey area on the left, or bioresources which degrade, so they have to be used generally rather quicker, and they're also quite heavy. A lot of the higher value sort of resources that you can see in orange there are the metallic minerals, the critical raw materials and so on, which we're importing. We're very import dependent on all of those high value materials in Europe. Now, when it comes to circularity, one big misconception is that it's all about recycling. And you can see that loop going along the bottom is actually quite thin. Now, the thickness of these resource flows are actually by weight. And it shows that recycling isn't such a big part of the picture. It's very important, particularly when it comes to those critical raw materials. But what we're trying to do, as Noel mentioned at the beginning, is actually keep value in the economy. That's what the circular economy is all about. We're trying to slow the flow of those resources from left to right. And that's where the real benefit is in circular economy. So you could say that we're trying to make that river more into a lake so that the resources stay in the economy and we get as much out of them as possible. So we're trying to get rid of single-use products. We're trying to make sure that products are more durable and that we use them more efficiently and more intensively. So we can move on to the next slide now, just to show what this looks like at a micro level. This is just to show that in a sense, well, this is the inputs into German manufacturing companies on average. And you can see what is really quite striking is that they spend a lot more on materials than they do on labor. So we've had a real focus on labor productivity in the last decades, whereas material productivity or material efficiency, getting more added value for each ton of those materials, is probably more important for our competitiveness. Now, if you can go on to the next slide. This is the most famous slide you've seen probably in every presentation on circular economy, and I think we'll see it again this morning. It's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's butterfly diagram, but it really shows how those feedback loops can help to keep that value in. On the right-hand side, you've got the technical resources. On the left-hand side, you've got the bioresources. And I wanted to make the point here that it's not just about the resource efficiency at the micro level. It's really about the business opportunities that there are in each of those kind of feedback loops. The business opportunities in keeping that value in, and when you're maximizing value, there is obviously a business case behind that. There are profits to be made and jobs to be created as well. So let's see how we put that into the European picture today. If you move on to the next slide. We started talking about circular economy, so as I said, moving from a more legislative to a more economic approach, I would say less than 10 years ago. And I was very much involved in that at the time. We created a resource efficiency platform in 2012 and our first circular economy strategy in 2014. But I think that the European Green Deal has really put it at the center of the policy-making agenda. And it's really emphasized its close links to achieving climate goals, to biodiversity. I already mentioned the importance for climate and biodiversity of the way we use our resources, but also very much at the center of our growth agenda. And President van der Leyen has been talking about the twin drivers of our future growth being digital and green. And I think that the circular economy is a very important part of the green twin, if you like. So what are we planning with the circular economy to make that work, to get those feedback loops working? How can we create a sort of policy framework for that to happen? Well, the first circular economy action plan 5 or 6 years ago was really focused on waste legislation, on that sort of loop underneath that I showed before on the slide. So we were pushing up the recycling targets in waste legislation and so on. But I think that the most striking thing that happened was in 2018, when we had this wave, if you'll excuse the pun, this wave of indignation about marine pollution and plastics, which gave us a real opportunity and a lot of political mobilization to do something about plastics as a whole. The marine pollution problem was really related to the whole way we produce and use and dispose of plastics. So we created a sort of holistic, very comprehensive approach to plastics, the plastic strategy. And I think that was a real groundbreaking moment. And I think that's influenced very much the the way we've decided to tackle circular economy in the new Circular Economy Action Plan, which brings us to the next slide. Just to give you a quick sort of overview of the structure of the Circular Economy Action Plan, I think that the fundamental thing you can see, well, you can see on that second line there that we're looking at the value chains. So like we looked at plastics, we're going to look at electronics, we're going to look at packaging, looking at textiles, looking at construction products and construction materials. So looking at the high impact value chains, very much in the way we looked at plastics, in that holistic fashion, looking at the production, consumption and disposal phases. But the second thing, which I think is really groundbreaking, is the focus on products. Now, why did we go for that? If we move on to the next slide, you'll see I've shown you a little bit what it looks like at the macro level with the flow diagram, a little bit what it looks like at the micro level. But if you look at it on the product level, as you said, Noel, at the beginning, it's really about keeping value in. And once a product becomes waste, it's lost most of its value. You can get a little bit out from recycling or component harvesting or whatever. So it's really about, I think our decision was really to say, at European level, we have 500 million consumers. We can use that collective consumer power. We have the single market. We can say what kind of products we want on the single market. We can make design obligations. We can use the Eco-Design Directive. And this is what we plan to do in the Circular Economy Action Plan, to really make sure that the products on our markets are designed for durability, for repairability, for recyclability, and so on. If we take electronics, for example, if you look at the next slide, just to emphasize the importance of design of the products that go on our markets. Of course, it's very different for a building compared to a plastic bag. There are all kinds of products on the market, but this is just to give an example. In electronics, about 80% of the energy and environmental impact of a smartphone are before it's even in the consumer's hands. So it's really so much about the extraction, processing of materials, production and distribution. Then when you look at the reasons that people get rid of a smartphone, only about 40% of people do that because their existing smartphone isn't working. And then you look at the lifespan of the smartphone, on average it's 21 months. So you can see there's a huge amount of lost value in those smartphones, in the way that they're produced, the way that maybe the software isn't, you can't upgrade the software on them anymore. So there are many reasons why they're not staying in the economy long enough. We're not getting use out of them. So in the Circular Economy Action Plan, the idea is to really make sustainable products not a niche, but to make them the norm, to use the Eco-Design Directive to expand the scope of it and to bring in criteria that are related not only to energy use, which has been the case in the past, but really durability, upgradability, these kinds of things. We're also focusing very much on the consumer aspect. So we're looking at how we can make sure that consumers are protected against greenwashing, they're protected against premature obsolescence of products, that they have a right to repair, and so on. So we're bringing in a green claims initiative. So any green claims, any product which is put on the market as being eco or green would have to be able to back that up with a life cycle analysis. Next slide is just to show, as I mentioned, that product-based focus for the future will be really initially looking at those high intensity, high energy and material intensive sectors, which you can see on the screen there. Just to mention, actually, Noel, you mentioned that tomorrow we will be adopting an important climate package, but also tomorrow, look out for the batteries regulation. We're bringing in a very important piece of circular legislation, which is a new batteries regulation, looking at how we can make sure that the electric vehicle batteries and industrial batteries get a long life and that they're used efficiently. And just lastly, one thing which I think is, and which you will see tomorrow in the batteries regulation, but we're planning to really apply to all product areas. So this is the next slide, I've jumped one, is the idea of a product passport. So the idea is to really be able to attach data to a product, and this is on the next slide, to be able to attach data to a product as it goes through the economy, so we can really try to make sure that the important information about it isn't lost. We'll see that already tomorrow. as a first time really in the batteries regulation, but we're planning to bring in the idea of having an identifier on each product on the market, so that you can find out what substances are in the product. You can find out information on how it can be repaired and spares availability, or all kinds of possibilities linked to that. And then just to finish off, because I think that, I mean, the pandemic came along just after, well, in Europe came along just after the Circular Economy Action Plan was adopted, and in a way it was the lack of investment capital that we had, which is a problem with the Circular Economy Action Plan. We had many policy levers we could pull, but whether they were enough to really bring about a transition is debatable. But I think that the stimulus packages that are coming along after the pandemic really give us a fantastic opportunity to plug that gap and to actually orient our future investment towards circular solutions. I think it's a great opportunity. And in the Commission, we're now starting to look at the recovery and resilience plans of the member states as they're coming in. I haven't seen the Irish one yet, but I'm sure it will come in. And we're really looking to see if we can build circularity and circular approaches, not just into sort of new repair activities and reuse and remanufacturing and typical circular economy areas, but also when we're looking at things like rolling out the 5G infrastructure, big infrastructure projects, renovation wave in construction. All of these, I think, should integrate circular aspects, how we can use the materials better, how we can make sure that those infrastructures are made in ways that are durable and recyclable and so on. I'll leave it there. Sorry if I've gone over a little bit over the time, but I hope that's a good start.
Absolutely great. Thank you very much, William. Really, really interesting. I myself learned a huge lot, and one of your slides jumped out at me when you were focusing on the life cycle of everything from TVs to phones to tablets and computers and laptops. I wonder what the life cycle will be now as we all deal with the challenges of working remotely during the pandemic, and whether the slide, William, might have to be updated if the lifetime span changes to increase usage on all our parts. But thank you very much, William, really setting the scene for us there. And from Brussels to Dublin we now go. I'm delighted to go to our next speaker on our distinguished panel today, Professor Kevin O'Connor from UCD School of Biomedical and Biomolecular Science. And Kevin is the director of the Bioeconomy Science Foundation Ireland Research Centre. Kevin, a very good morning to you, and over to you.
And good morning, everybody. So I'm delighted to be able to speak today, and thanks very much for the invitation. So I'm going to tell you about the bioeconomy and where it fits in the circular economy. Now, William has already referred to the butterfly diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and I will use it as well. It's a well-trodden path, the Ellen MacArthur, because they've been out front leading in the circular economy. So next slide, please. So when the bioeconomy started, and I suppose the bioeconomy exists for millennia, so we all use the bioeconomy, agriculture, forestry, the marine, it's all very much part of our lives. It produces food, it produces materials. We used to take chemicals from the bioeconomy. If you use turpentine, it was original name is wood turpentine. All of the glues and things come from the bioeconomy. I'll show you some examples later. But we have switched, of course, maybe over 100 years ago to fossil-based resources. And so everything we do, the clothes we wear, the chairs you're sitting in, we probably haven't used that much transport today because we're all at home from COVID. But we're pretty much absolutely addicted to fossil. And so the idea, if you click next, please, the idea is that we need this paradigm shift away from fossil because we know it's running out. We know it contributes to global warming. We know it contributes to air pollution, water pollution. So we have to switch to the use of our natural resources, the bioeconomy. When the bioeconomy started, or this new bioeconomy, where we're now saying, well, where are we going to get our materials from? Where are we going to produce our energy? We're going to look now to our natural resources. The transition was originally envisaged as almost like a linear substitution of the fossil. So make, take, dispose from fossil. Well, we'll just make, take, dispose from nature. And that doesn't work. what we need is circularity. So many have been asking the question, well, where does the bioeconomy really fit into the circular economy? Because if you're taking natural resources, are you just going to deplete our natural resources and cause environmental damage? And as William has said, what's really important to the circular economy, what's really important to the bioeconomy is climate change and biodiversity. So how can we actually build a bioeconomy that is going to be circular and not linear? Next slide, please. So there are a few cartoons here, icons that are associated with the circular economy. So for example, we need to preserve our natural resources. We need to regenerate and use energy, renewable materials. If we use those materials, we need to optimize and use those resources, which again, Noel and William have referred to. But it's also about closed loops and optimized closed loops. Where do you use those materials? And if they're in the manufacturing cycle, can you continue to reuse them within the manufacturing cycle and not have them sent down to waste? As William again has referred to, smart design. It's not necessarily that, okay, you can use a bio-based material, but can it be lighter? Can you use less resources? Can it be environmentally friendly in terms of its capturing CO2? But at the end of its life cycle, what happens to it? It shouldn't be disposed of. You should try to keep it in the value cycle. But also sharing. Yeah, so the bioeconomy, you also want to share resources. So that's very important to the circular economy and to the bioeconomy. Next slide, please. So here's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation butterfly diagram. And so as William has pointed out, on the right is your technical side, on the left is your biological side. I'll focus more on the biological side for my presentation. Next click, please, sorry. So what we can see is that, for example, we mentioned farming and collection. Well, that is the use of our natural resource, our biological resources. And so we must use them in a way that we can actually sustainably produce. So we have to have recycling of materials, but also we have to use our resources sustainably. Yeah. So what kind of crops are we growing? Are we using waste? Can you go to the next click, please? So it's also about balancing the resources that you take out and also restoring the resources that you're using by building in, for example, forestry, by building in certain, by dedicating certain land to biodiversity. You are actually having productive land. There is people use words like, well, that's not productive farming land. Our argument would be, in a circular bioeconomy, if you dedicate land to biodiversity, that is productive. There is an ecosystem service associated with that biodiversity. That biodiversity can also help you to have resilience when you want to produce your crops, because certain crops can attract certain insects, they can promote biodiversity, they can reduce fertilizer inputs, they can trap water runoff, which will prevent eutrophication of rivers. So there's a massive amount of value in restoration, in conservation, which can actually sustain the production of the materials that you need to make buildings, to make plastics, etc. So that's really important. Next click, sorry, please. But also renewable energy. Renewable energy is also part of the bioeconomy. We're working on projects in Bioorbic with farms, where we're looking at wind turbines, solar energy, because in actual fact, farms are a huge source of renewable energy. We have done analysis that shows that farms use about 15% of the energy that they can generate. So there's a huge potential for the bioeconomy to contribute to micro-generation of electricity. Next click. But also we talk about, extracting value out of feedstocks. There's a huge amount of waste that is generated, byproducts that are generated that are unavoidable. We don't want to be promoting food waste. I know Emma will talk next about food cloud, but we don't want to be talking about food waste. What we want to be talking about is unavoidable food waste. And so if we have, for example, in food processors where you have side streams that are unavoidable, what do we do with those? If on farms you have things like slurries, you have grass biorefineries, there will be side products. What do you do with those? Increase your resource efficiency. So nothing should be viewed as a waste. It should be used as a byproduct for further use. Next, please. So just some of the things that you can make from the bioeconomy, that some are historical and some are current. So in actual fact, a lot of the paints and dyes that we have traditionally used have come from nature. So if any of you wear denims, you have an indigo blue dye. That indigo dye used to come from dyer's knotweed or indigofera. It was replaced by a chemical process by Bayer, the chemical company, and that's really the process that is used now. Biotechnology has now come up with a fermentation process to produce indigo, which is environmentally friendly. However, it's too expensive, but technologically is possible. But just to say that paints and dyes, if you look at these vegetables, they're actually, and fruits, they're actually providing a range of dyes and paints. Solvents and glues, that's a picture here. We're actually seeing some sap from a tree. If you boil off the sap, you can actually get a solvent, a turpentine, and you're left with a sap that can be used for glues. But that's, again, traditional type of forestry. And actually, those glues are still used today as natural glues in the market. Pharmaceuticals, that's white willow, is down in the bottom left. White willow bark, if you buy, it was used by traditional Native American Indians for headaches and fever. If you bite on it, you would get a reduction in fever. The reason being it contains salicylic acid. Salicylic acid is actually the precursor to aspirin. So it took chemists about 100 years to actually be able to purify out the active ingredient and then develop a synthetic method. So originally they were isolating it from various plants and providing it that way, but it was more expensive. They then developed a chemical method, and then aspirin grew, and we all know that aspirin is available worldwide. As a matter of fact, it's a salt of aspirin that's available because raw aspirin will upset your stomach. So that's why it took the chemist so long to finally get an ingredient that was palatable and not too harsh on the stomach. And in more recent years, what you see is plastics. So we're seeing bio-based plastics, which are coming from nature. Some of those plastics are not biodegradable, but they are recyclable. Some of them are biodegradable and recyclable. And there is quite a bit of debate, and I'll get into that in my later slides. I've only one or two more left about bioplastics. Next slide, please. So just in BioOrbic, what we're doing is we're taking a variety of resources. We're working on CO2. There's too much CO2 in the world. So we're trying to take some of the CO2 and convert it into something of value, so trap the carbon. We're looking at waste plastic bottles. We're looking at waste cooking oil. We're looking at side streams like whey that come from cheese manufacture and converting that into something of value. Next slide, please, or next click. So we use membranes to separate out different dirty mixes of waste products. We use novel materials, we use novel engineering approaches, and we separate out molecules. Next click, please. And those molecules we then feed into chemistry, synthetic chemistry, or into fermenters to do biotechnology. Next click. And what we do is get a variety of products. Some of them are biodegradable plastics, some of them are glues, some of them are pharmaceuticals, some of them are bioactives that can help reduce methane emissions from animals. Some are used in paint. So it's a wide variety of different products. So I suppose what I'm trying to get across here is that you can take waste materials, you can take bio-based materials, and you can convert them into something of value. So try to increase the resource efficiency. So per hectare of agricultural land, you would like to see that you get as much material and much value as possible. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example, I suppose biodegradable plastics are they're quite controversial. There's quite a topic about them. We've released a paper in around 2018 or 2019 saying that, they offer society more end-of-life options. So currently you cannot compost or industrially compost a PET plastic bottle, a plastic bottle for water, for a soft drink, carbonated drinks. But if you were to make a biodegradable equivalent, you could compost them. So that gives you more options. If your food contaminated, it gives you more options at the end of life, because food contaminated plastics are incredibly difficult to recycle. So they're not a panacea for ocean pollution. So there is a myth out there that, oh, it's biodegradable, I can throw it away and it will biodegrade, end of problem. That is not the solution. If I had 100,000 tons of banana skins and I said they're biodegradable and I'm going to go down to Dublin Bay and I'm going to dump them in Dublin Bay, sure, it's fine, they'll biodegrade. Would we think that's a good idea? I don't think so, yeah? So these plastics actually are industrially compostable. So in Ireland, in Dublin, we have a brown bin collection. You put your biodegradables in there, it's collected and it's composted. It produces compost that can be used then by gardeners in certain horticultural practices. it returns nutrients to the soil. So I'm showing you a quite complex diagram here, but on the left you have biodegradation relative to cellulose. So cellulose is the standard. And so if you compare different plastics, some of them are actually fossil-based, but biodegradable. So the fossil does not say they're non-degradable. Fossil just says where they come from. And some of them are bio-based and biodegradable. So polycaprolactone up at the top, PCL, it's a highly biodegradable plastic, but it comes from fossil. TPS is thermoplastic starch coming from corn, and that is also highly biodegradable. And PHB coming from bacteria, they make this biodegradable polymer. It's also highly degradable, more degradable than cellulose. You then have other plastics like PLA, polylactic acid. It's being made now in Asia, being made in Europe. It's replacing plastic bottles, trays, etc. It is also industrially compostable. And then PBS, which is fossil-based, some of it can be made from sugar. It's very slow to degrade. What I'm trying to show you here is that under industrial composting, you can take all of these plastics and they will degrade as good as cellulose. They meet the standard. That dashed line is the standard that is required under EN, the European norm 13432 for food packaging. Yeah, so they do the job. But what happens when they go into the ocean? Next slide, please. So we also looked at their degradation in laboratory conditions mimicking the marine. And it's actually at 30 degrees. And I don't know if any of you go swimming in the sea, but in Dublin, it certainly isn't 30 degrees. Yeah. And so in the middle of the ocean, it's not going to be 30 degrees either. But it is the standard that they apply. And it does give you an indicator of how well these things degrade. And what we see on the far left is that polylactic acid doesn't degrade at all in a marine environment because it requires industrial composting. So the message is these plastics can be part of a circular economy. You can recycle them. Polylactic acid is recyclable. If it is food contaminated, you can actually compost it and you can return those nutrients to the soil. So there is a way in which you can extend the life of it by recycling it, by having smart design, but at the end of its life, it can be returned to nature. There are other plastics like PCL, PHO, PBS, etc. They're not any good either. Like they nearly make the standard of PCL, but they don't make the standard. PBS and PHO, if you put those in the marine, they're just not going to degrade very quickly. And PHB and TPS make the standard. So TPS is a thermoplastic starch. That'll degrade within 30 days, which is pretty rapid. So what I would say is that if you have fishing nets that are going to, go to the bottom of the ocean, there I think you need to design in biodegradability because it is required. But don't design in biodegradability to enable people to throw away things. We should be designing biodegradability only where we really absolutely need it. And I think for industrial composting, we need it, for example. Next slide. So I know I went over a bit, but just to conclude, we must have circular economy principles into the evolving bioeconomy. The bioeconomy is very complex, so it requires multiple actors from engineering, science, technology, business, but also social science, policymakers. That's going to be really important to have a truly circular bioeconomy development. We can make multiple products from bio-based, from the bioeconomy. We've been doing it for millennia, and we need to go back to the future. And bio-based products must be managed at the end of their life. That is really, really important. We cannot have a throwaway culture that substitutes fossil with the bioeconomy. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Really interesting presentation. I'm still trying to get that mental image of the hundreds of thousands of banana skins out of Dublin Bay out of my mind there. But thank you very much. Really interesting presentation, and fantastic to see the questions coming in, folks. So thank you for that. I'd encourage you to continue to send in your questions. We've a great panel of speakers. events@europeanmovement.ie or EU Green Deal Circular Economy on Twitter. And I'm delighted now to turn, I think we're over to London now, I think, to Emma Walsh. Emma is the International Partnerships Director of Food Cloud. Emma, you have the virtual floor. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I work for a fantastic organisation called Food Cloud, and I think just to follow on from what the previous speakers have said, Food Cloud is probably a good example of the circular economy in action on the ground. So next slide, please. At Food Cloud, our vision is for a world where no good food goes to waste, and we transform the problem of surplus food into the opportunity to make the world a kinder place. Next slide, please. So food we don't eat. So over 30% of all food produced worldwide is wasted. And this is actually responsible for about 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. And this is pretty staggering if you consider that aviation has gas emissions. So the food that we don't eat not only impacts on our ability to feed ourselves for the future, it also is responsible for warming up our planet and, creating, I suppose, unpredictable weather systems in the future that will impact on crops and our harvests. At the same time as this, we have the environmental problem of food waste, but we also have the kind of social and moral problem where we have in Ireland, even where people don't, I suppose, wouldn't rightly recognise there being a problem around, I suppose, food insecurity, that we have 1 in 11 people experience food poverty, and worldwide about 820 million people are hungry. And I guess these figures would be pre-COVID. So as a result of COVID, we have probably seen a dramatic increase in the number of people who are now trying to access food aid. And also, we've seen, I suppose, increases in food waste and across certain parts of the food supply chain. So next slide, please. So Food Cloud, what do we do? So we're an NGO or a charity. We were set up in Ireland in 2013. Our founders met in university in Trinity College, and they saw that although Ireland had a really rich agricultural heritage, there was nothing really happening at a national level to redistribute food that wasn't being sold or eaten. So we started to connect supermarkets to local charities using technology. And this, very simply, the model is very simple at its basic level. A supermarket or retail outlet can put details of the food that they have not sold that's still perfectly fine for consumption. They can put this into our app. This sends a message to a local charity, and the charity come and pick up that food directly and use it to support their service users and use it in the community. Next slide, please. So I guess this model was pretty innovative at the time, and still I guess is, using technology to kind of redistribute small amounts of food on a very large scale. But globally there's a food banking model where food banks, which would typically be set up as a large warehouse with logistics and transport, would take food from across the supply chain, bring that in, pack it, store it, and then redistribute it to charities. And I guess we've also set up a network of 3 warehouses across Ireland where we have hubs in Dublin, Cork and Galway, where we work with the food industry to redistribute these larger volumes of food. So this could be packets of cereal with Santa on them that we will get in February when Christmas is over. This could be Easter eggs that we will get in May. So all food that's still perfectly good and suitable to eat, but for a huge variety of reasons doesn't make it to the end consumer. So in Ireland, we work with about 600 charities and we redistribute about 2,200 tonnes of food a year, but I think that will be dramatically increased this year as a result of COVID. And if you could just go to the next slide, please. So I guess what Food Cloud looks like today, I suppose 7 years later, is we have food donation technology where we have an in-house team where we develop technology to redistribute surplus food. And I guess very much so in line with what we're kind of seeing, the kind of core principles of the circular economy, where we're trying to use digitization to create a kind of mass scalable solution that's able to redistribute these kind of highly perishable products quickly. We also have set up our food bank network where we have our bricks and mortar infrastructure to take food from across the supply chain. And then we continue to innovate. So, I guess as Kevin kind of pointed out earlier with the butterfly diagrams, our main focus is to keep as much of the food for its intended use. So we want all of this food to go back into the human food chain. But I guess, there are always going to be products that we can't have, I suppose, we might get gluts of products and we might struggle to kind of distribute those in their kind of original form. So I'll give you an example. We get, every year we have volunteers who will go and glean apples, Falling Fruit Ireland. It's a fantastic volunteer network, and there's many orchards, I suppose, all over the country that really have huge crops that are never harvested. It's a lot of work. You need a lot of volunteers to do it. So we get huge volumes of apples in. A lot of people, there's a lot of work in an Irish apple. It's not like your Golden Delicious or your Pink Lady. So we sort of looked at what are the other opportunities. So we created apple juice, which is a long life shelf stable product where we can extend the life of the product, but also we can take this and kind of make it in more useful form. So, there's lots of innovations that we have like this going on. We're going to set up we're, I suppose, piloting at the moment, setting up kind of test kitchens so we can take these products with the aim of changing maybe their kind of current form, but also getting them back into the human supply chain. So next slide, please. So I guess in addition to our work in Ireland, we see a huge opportunity to share our technology globally. And our technology has been used by Tesco and Waitrose across the UK in partnership with the food bank organisation in the UK called FairShare. So 33% of FairShare's food in 2019, which is about almost 8,000 tonnes of food, was redistributed through the technology. And this has a huge benefit for the food banks where they can kind of reach communities outside of their kind of bricks and mortar operations. And just the next slide, please. Yeah, so to date, we've worked with about 9,500 community groups across Ireland and the UK. We've redistributed the equivalent of 90 million meals that would have otherwise gone to waste. And obviously, these have significant impacts for people and the planet. But I guess we see a big opportunity to continue to do more on this. So just the next slide there. I guess when we look at the food system and we look at, I suppose, food security, we have a huge food gap. By 2050, there's going to be somewhere close to 10 billion people on this planet. And in order to feed all of those, we're going to have to increase the food we produce. It's estimated that the food gap is about 56% based on 2010 levels. Now, if we continue to waste 1 in every 4 calories, we're going to have a really hard job to produce enough food to feed all the people on the planet. And especially if you think about the pandemic has obviously had a huge impact on us, but this is not going to be the last shock or, unexpected scenario that impacts our food system significantly. And if we look at extreme weather events, which are going to increase as the planet gets warmer as well. So we really have to work very hard to try and reduce the amount of food that we're wasting in order to be able to feed the global population in the future. The other side around food redistribution, I suppose we're very much so aware of the fact that the number of people served by the global food banking networks is on the rise, and 9% annual increase in people served was reported in 2019. This will be dramatically increased after the year that we've had and for the subsequent years to come as we continue to see recessions globally. And I suppose that the final point of food redistribution is, I suppose, has so many wins. Like if we look at, I suppose, reversing climate change, Project Drawdown has listed reducing food waste as the third most important solution in order to be able to, I suppose, reverse climate change, because when food rots, it produces methane, and methane is, I suppose, about 23 times as impactful on the environment as carbon. So there's a lot of really compelling reasons to try and do more to rescue food. And just the next slide, if that's okay. So we've seen during COVID that there's been, I think, about 1 million tons of milk disposed of in the UK alone, while we've seen that the food banks have struggled hugely with the increase of people that they're that have wanted to access food aid and the last couple of months. So we have a hugely fragile food system. So at FoodCloud, we believe that by introducing, I suppose, more circularity and more ways of redistributing food, we can have a big impact. And it's really, I suppose, COVID has really shone a light on this. And just the next slide. So at Food Cloud, we've seen that we have a really good solution for connecting supermarkets to local charities, but we really believe that we can do more by harnessing technology to rescue as much food as possible. Next slide, please. And we see that, I guess, that we're launching some new technology next year, where we aim to, I suppose, bring what we've learned from working at a retail level with technology to kind of all stages of the food chain, and try and ensure that as much food returns into the human supply chain as possible. And just the next slide, please. So we're launching a 3-year program with our new technology, and where we'll work to, I suppose, use food donation technology at every stage, from, I suppose, really trying to, encompass the principles from farm to fork, and support food banks across a number of geographies to rescue as much food as possible, and to really help as many of those in need as we can. And just, I think I have one more slide there. So we've an ambitious launch program over the next 3 years to build on the work that we've done over the past 7. We're hoping to reach 9 countries and new food banks, to work with 20 global food businesses to help them donate their food, and to have an initial impact through our launch program of 50 million meals. And obviously these will hopefully have significant benefits for, I suppose, people and the planet. So that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Emma. That was really interesting to hear about the fantastic work and in fact the amazing journey that Food Cloud and you and your colleagues have been on. And I mean, one stat that of your presentation really stood out for me, that was that 33% of food produced goes to waste. It just seems incredible. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. Our final speaker today was due to have been Les Carberry, the head of the Circular Economy Division at the Department of Environment, Climate and Communications here in Ireland. And unfortunately, he was unable to participate this morning and sent his regrets. So that is our fantastic panel. And I would like to thank them for their great presentations. We have a couple of questions coming in, so I'll jump straight into those. I see one from John first that, William, I might go to you on. And John poses a really good question onto whether there are grants available for companies who repair and refurbish electronic parts in the European Union.
Yes, good question. I know that there have been some projects funded which are very much on a research basis. So through the Horizon program, for example, and things like robotic disassembly of electronics and repair. However, I guess that the main opportunities there would either be coming from regional funding or now from the recovery and resilience plans which the member states are drawing up. So I think that both of those really depend on the operational programs that are drawn up by the member states. So if you want to try to take advantage of those, you really need to get onto your national authorities and try and emphasize that they should be building those kind of investment projects into their either operational programs for regional funding, or as I say, the recovery and resilience plans are being drafted as we speak. So now is the time, I think, to really get that across to the member states. But coming from the European level for that kind of activity, it would be, unless it's on a research basis for the Horizon program.
No, that's great, William. Thank you for that. And John, I hope William has given you some food for thought there. And another great question has come in from Eileen, and I might throw it open both to yourself, Kevin, and Emma, because I think it could be an interesting one for both of you to have a look at. But Eileen's question is, how do you incorporate equality into a circular economy? Kevin, I see your mic is unmuted first, so I'll jump to you first, and then Emma, you can follow.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, it's a very good question. It's something that we spend a lot of time in research. We have a sustainability platform, and one of the questions is about just transition. So you'll have heard maybe about the just transition, the European Commission's plans to leave nobody behind. And so in a bioeconomy, for example, there is a huge risk that the wealth and the power can be monopolized or can be in the hands of a few. And so, for example, I would say that farmers could be left behind. So in the development of the bioeconomy and a circular bioeconomy, there's an assumption that the biomass will just appear, that, it will just be produced, and then industry will take it and make lots of money. And then, but in actual fact, if you don't reward the farmer, if you don't understand that rural communities need to be part of the solution, and that is also for climate change, where farmers at the moment are under the microscope because, they're the ones that are producing the greenhouse gases. Emma mentioned that methane, 23 times more greenhouse or global warming potential than CO2. And so we're trying to work with farmers to say, listen, in a just transition, we want to empower you to make changes so that you build in biodiversity, that you become part of the solution and not the problem, so that you change practices, diversify. So I think to build in equality, you must have stakeholder engagement and meaningful stakeholder engagement. That is not, hey, listen, this is the circular economy, this is what we're doing. Don't you think it's great? More about, well, what is the circular economy to you? How can your business change? And that's also for consumers. Consumers often feel disempowered. They don't feel like they can actually make significant changes in their lives because, things are overpackaged. Things come in a certain way. Your washing machine, well, it just has inbuilt obsolescence. And if I went down and tried to get it repaired, it will cost me as much to repair it as it is to buy a new one. So you're not empowering me. And I know William made reference to that, to the repair economy. So I think to build in equality, you must build in stakeholders from the start, from the bottom up. And a lot of things have to be also from the ground up. And I'm sorry now for hogging the mic, but I am working with the Commission on missions. There are 5 mission boards. The European Commission are trying to launch what are effectively moonshots. When America said we want to get to the moon, how are we going to do this? What are we missing, and how do we get people involved to buy into this and really inform how we get there? So the European Commission are also launching missions on soil. Soil is the bedrock of our existence, of our food production system. We know that we have soil degradation as a result of our practices. How do we have a soil mission so that we can get back to healthy soils? They also have it for climate change and climate adaptation. Yeah, so, and that mission is saying of course, we need some top down. We're going to have some big launches, but we also need bottom up. We need to get citizens involved and say, what is your community? How is your community affected? What do you think are the solutions to climate change and climate adaptation for your community? So I do think for equality, you need inclusion, you need diversity, and you need to listen to people.
Fantastic, Kevin. You've actually managed to answer both Mary's and Shane's question there as well, because on the next question I was going to pose was, what measures can we do in Ireland in terms of having one of the largest rural populations in Europe, and how can we ensure that certain aims of the action plan are fit for purpose for our rural communities? So I think you've managed to answer that question as well. Fantastic. Emma, I might ask you to speak on that, incorporating equality in a circular economy from a Food Cloud perspective. Where do you see the opportunities and challenges there?
Yeah, so I suppose that the fair and just transition is, as Kevin said, is really important, and leaving no one behind. And I think we need really joined up thinking, and at a very basic level, we need to reward the behaviors that we want to encourage. And I'll give you kind of, I suppose, a couple of examples around this. Like, if we're producing food, the most important thing is that food is consumed by humans, right? So obviously there's lots of things that you can do with food waste, which I suppose, are better than it going to landfill. But say using it for animal feed, for different valorization opportunities, and using it to produce energy, are some things that, ultimately are commonly happen with food waste. But sometimes the most difficult piece is to get this food back into the human supply chain. So, what we do, we're a charity. It's not something that I guess there's a lot of financial reward for, because if there was, a lot of other people would be doing it ultimately. But, it's very difficult for us if, say, say like the food banks in the UK, there's incentives around sending food for anaerobic digestion. And if it's easier for businesses to send food to use it to create energy, then it's going to be very difficult to get it back to people. And we need to feed people because, you know, not only is it a positive thing to the planet, it's also a positive thing to do when we have lots of people who don't have enough food to eat. So I guess that you know, we really need to think about the incentives we have, how these lined up, and how we make it easy for, you know, the I suppose the highest return on like the best options to come out as winners here. So I think it's difficult, though. It is really difficult. You know, it's like we have to make it easy for businesses to do this as well. You know, like we deal with supermarkets. Food waste is only one tiny part of their operations on a day-to-day basis. And I guess the solutions we come up with in order for them to be fair and support a just transition, they need to, I suppose, we all need to play a part in them. We all need to realize that maybe, you know, the food that we're going to eat is going to be more expensive. We need to pay a fair price for it. But also, we also need to recognize that we need to bring everybody on the journey, and we have to set up the right incentives. So as Kevin said earlier, that the farmers are not the ones that are going to be left with the huge burden around the emissions. So I guess things like, you know, I suppose there's a lot of conversation around this at the moment, but say, for example, if you're kind of a food manufacturer, you know, you're buying food, that maybe you're looking at buying the whole field of crops rather than just the crops that meet the specs, that you look at buying a whole pen of fish rather than just the things that make the grades for kind of onward consumption. So I think there's lots of interesting ideas, but we need to think holistically about it.
Fantastic. No, absolutely. Emma, really good points there. I think both Kevin and William, you wanted to come in on that. So Kevin, do you want to go first, and then William, if you follow?
I let William in. He was asking first one. Yeah. William, fire away.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to tie a few things together there, because in my presentation I didn't really say very much about the left wing of the Ellen MacArthur butterfly, the bio resources. I was focusing a little bit more on products, electronics, and these kinds of things. But certainly, as I showed, one of the value chains that we focus on is food and water and nutrients. A lot of that will be done through the farm to fork strategy of the Commission. But certainly, what Emma's been saying is really true. I mean, it's like the flow diagram I showed. It's really, if at all possible, to stop that food going to waste. When it does become waste, I think one very important and imminent change will be from the 1st of January 2024, there will be a legal obligation for municipalities to separately collect food waste. So, of course, there's avoidable food waste, which we shouldn't even have in the waste. But for the rest of it, there will be a legal obligation for it to be separately collected, which is great, and municipalities will have to do that. But the issue is, what do we do with it then? We should keep it out of landfill for sure, because then it's producing lots of methane and climate problems. But we can then think about how we want to invest in maybe getting the infrastructure together for biogas, or for nutrient cycling, for composting. But I mean, if we're going to have this new stream of separately collected waste in 3 or 4 years from now, we should think about the business opportunities and where we need to invest to use that. And then just linking that to the equality debate, just to give an example, in terms of gender equality, I mean, of course, we have to sort of link the SDG 12, which is a sustainable production and consumption, to SDG 5, which is the gender SDG. I'm not aware of a lot of debate going on about how gender equality is part of the picture, but I do know that there are quite a few examples of circular businesses that have been set up and run by women, and one which is actually in the area of bioresources is called Orange Fiber, which is actually converting citrus fiber into textiles. So there are examples. When it comes to wider equality, I think that there are two things there. One is the employment possibilities. A lot of the employment possibilities related to things like repair and reuse, that they're local because they have to be close to where the product is being used. So even if the product is produced in Asia, the repair and so on is locally based. So it tends to give rise to a lot of locally based employment opportunities, and they're not all low quality jobs. I mean, we're talking jobs going throughout the spectrum of skills. And then on the other side, I think that it's important to say that moving from necessarily purchasing and owning products to just having access to their use, to being able to share them, or to having products as a service. So when you're not actually sold the product, you buy access to it and the use of it, does enable access to certain products which many people might not normally have. And I think particularly post-COVID, that might be something which is increasingly important.
Great. No, thanks, William. And William, I might just ask you an interesting question before jumping to Kevin and Emma in a second. But in terms of the, wearing your commission hat and having the sort of the overarching view from the commission, who do you see as being best in class or being a market leader, and how do you see us in Ireland possibly looking to emulate some of those best practices? So, like, who gets a gold star in terms of the circular economy action plan amongst the different member states, and what are those projects and initiatives that those countries are doing that we in Ireland could possibly look to follow as well?
That's a really important question, actually, because I've been traveling around it. Well, before the pandemic, I was traveling around with a kind of circular economy roadshow, and we focused it on the member states that were doing worst in their waste management. And there we have statistics from Eurostat, and we know who are the ones that are achieving it and who aren't. And we thought, well, when the ministers come to Brussels, the environment ministers, they say, oh, we give them a hard time, of course, because they're not meeting the waste targets. And we were aware that this shouldn't really be a legal compliance issue anymore. They should be able to go back to their capitals and say to the finance minister or the economy minister, well, actually, this isn't just my problem; it's an opportunity. So if circular economy is the new way, we shouldn't be looking at waste as a problem. We should be saying it shouldn't exist because it's an opportunity for other economic activities. So we wanted to get across a positive message. And of course, it is true that mostly the countries that are the worst on waste management tend to be the least progressive in terms of circular economy. The one notable exception, I would say, is Portugal, where they have a really vibrant and interesting, lots of new businesses which are being set up in circular economy. Oh, that's right. But then I think that if you look at the other best performers on circular economy, it tends to be the Nordics. The Dutch are very progressive. The French have just brought in a very progressive circular economy law. So it's not always the case that it's the best in terms of waste. If you're looking at good, inspiring examples from the business community, I would suggest that you go to our stakeholder platform, which is a virtual platform where you can do filters according to country, to sector, and all kinds of other filters. So you can really get inspiration and find some good examples there. But
great.
Yeah, I find that circular economy is not necessarily very well known outside of environment circles, environment ministries, outside of the capital cities, and we really have a lot of effort to do to get it out to the regions, get it really mainstreamed, and so it's getting out of that bubble.
Great. No, thanks, William. And Kevin, to follow on from that, another question has come in just in terms of, and I think which kind of ties in nicely to some of the comments that William and Emma were saying. What would you see, Kevin, as some of the opportunities for Ireland to emerge as a leader in Europe in implementing the action plan, or in terms of implementing some of the specific product value chains? And are there areas, to follow on from what William was saying, at a European level, but are there areas that we in Ireland are leading on that, and we are best in class and could show the way to our fellow EU member states?
Yeah, so I think Emma mentioned that in effect, Food Cloud are offering food collection technology, and it's IT based. I think Ireland has is really strong in IT. I think blockchain, supply chains, efficiencies. I think Ireland can really do something there in terms of material supplies. William talked about the passport, product passport. All of these things are going to be incredibly important in terms of telling the consumer, ultimately showing the consumer that this particular product has a certain carbon footprint, it has a certain lifetime, that it has multiple components, that it's easy to recycle, easy to reuse. And as Williams pointed out, recycling is actually the bottom end of the new pyramid. The Environmental Protection Agency pyramid has landfilling at the bottom, and it has, prevention at the top. Well, the new pyramid is effectively saying, okay, we want to keep these things in the material cycle, so we want to be able to disassemble them, reuse them. And I think, again, Ireland, with our manufacturing base, etc., we should be able to open up opportunities for entrepreneurs, for material design, for new packaging. We have incredibly strong food companies, agri-food. So it's, again, an opportunity for the agri-food companies to say, well, we want to reduce our carbon footprint, so we're working on farm level to reduce emissions, to increase biodiversity. We're looking at our processing plants to reuse renewable energy, to minimize waste, to recycle. That's all circular economy. But now the product that gets to you as a consumer, that packaging is actually now smart packaging. It's lighter, it's more recyclable, it's more reusable. It has component parts. All of that is where I think Ireland can really play a big role. We have opportunities there because we have the big businesses and we have the entrepreneurs. I think we have an entrepreneurial spirit, so it's combining that. And if I can just go back maybe to just one thing that Emma said there about the joined up thinking, I think that's really important. We need to learn from some of the mistakes. I think Oscar Wilde said, people say they learn from their experiences, they don't, they learn from their mistakes. So the joined up thinking is really important. If we divert food that is perfectly usable for humans and divert it to things like making biofuels or biogas, that is a huge mistake. Yeah, so we must keep food waste to a minimum, and where it's unavoidable, okay, now the anaerobic digestion and the other technologies kick in because that's what you need to do. But I totally agree, you need to be using unavoidable food waste. So what I say is, the first one is in the factory where you're actually processing, let's say, milk, and you get cheese, and then cheese provides whey. Whey is a byproduct. There's your unavoidable food waste now. Yeah. And when you're talking about supermarkets, it should be going to other consumers. And that's, again, about equality. Yeah. Resources. There's so many resources go into making that food. The worst possible end game is that it goes to make bioenergy. Yeah. So it really, I just want to reiterate that there's going to be a huge push to reduce carbon footprint of businesses. Don't then end up wasting food, because it's the next time bomb. Yeah. Saying, well, I'm carbon neutral, but my food doesn't end up in people's mouths. Yeah. So you really have to balance that and have that joined up thinking.
Absolutely. And Emma, I saw you nodding along to some of Kevin's remarks there. Did you want to jump in on any particular point?
Yeah, like I think, it's there is so much opportunity now that we're kind of having these conversations more widely, even to think about, like, I'll give you another kind of practical example, like there's a European Food Aid program called FIAD, and each member state gets an allocation of funding to, I suppose, use to buy food to feed the most deprived. And in Ireland, Food Cloud work with the Department of Social Protection for this. And, there's an opportunity to actually use some of that funding to support the redistribution of surplus food. And if we think about, the different incentives and implements that we have at our availability, and I think, when you look at the policy documents coming out, and it kind of talks about the kind of greener public procurement or whatever it is, if we start to think, about, even things that the EU is funding, so, we could potentially, instead of buying product, we could use some of that funding to support buying food from farmers that, isn't making it to shelves. So that's like supporting farmers who, at the moment really need that support. It supports people. You know, the food system is great if you can afford to go to go to a shop to buy food. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't, especially, and that's increasing. So it supports those who are at risk of social exclusion, and it also supports the planet. So I think that, you know, there's so many ways that we can think about how to incorporate, like, you know, these kind of smarter initiatives into things that we're already doing, and like small changes will help us to go a long way. And I'm always really encouraged by the kind of journey of Food Cloud, because if you think about it, we have about 3,500 supermarkets across the UK and Ireland who donate food on, I suppose, a daily basis. And that's really, you know, maybe 1 to 2 trays of these kind of green trays of food. It's quite small volumes. And you think about lots of people going to get those in those communities. And if you said, oh, you know, that's like really small and it's not going to have a big impact, you know, you might, like, it's very easy to say that, but actually when you add that all up and you take all these people making all of these small actions on a daily basis, it gives us a lot of hope for actually reversing climate change and having a kind of more positive environmental impact. So I think we need to take small steps. We need to look at things we're already doing and how we can incrementally improve them as well. So, but I think there's a lot of positivity for the future.
And I think that's on that really positive note. With your permission, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's a good concluding point to draw proceedings to a close today, because unfortunately we are out of time, which is always a really good sign. If I could, on behalf of everyone who's following online, pay a special tribute and thanks to, I'm sure what you'll agree, were 3 outstanding presentations and Q&A debate. So my thanks to William, Kevin and Emma for both giving so generously of their time, of their insights. And if I could thank our colleagues in the European Commission representation in Ireland, as always, for their help and support in making today's really timely and informative event and seminar happen, I think, which is fantastic. And as well, my thanks to my own team here in European Movement Ireland. And I would like to thank everyone who has dialed in online. It's a busy week for everyone. I really appreciate that. And I think the Q&A and the questions that people submitted and the online conversation was fantastic, and really bodes well for the greater traction and focus on the importance of the circular economy. I think, to your point, William, of mainstreaming it. So I think an opportunity for us all to support the great work that both William and Kevin and Emma are doing in their respective areas. But thank you for your comments and for getting involved. You've certainly enriched and enlivened this morning's debate and discussion. And if I may, I suppose, is it too early? Well, it's not. We are the 8th of December. So until we meet again, please, Slán go fóill, stay safe. And am I the first person to wish everyone a safe, happy Christmas? And until we all log on again for another event, thank you for your attention, and Slán go fóill. Bye-bye.